Good evening and welcome to Nashville. I'm Alan Jackson. A lot of people tuned into the news this week and saw something pretty disturbing. It was a photo op from China that included a collection of world leaders. Putin and Xi were there, referring to each other as old friends. North Korea and Cuba and many more were also there, smiling, shaking hands. To what end? We don't know. But it's safe to assume they weren't gathering to talk about how great the United States is. And that's despite the fact that so many of them are dependent on our country. You know, obviously China would have a much smaller market for what it produces if it weren't for the U.S. And as for Russia, that country actually buys more than $3 billion worth of goods from the U.S., including medical devices, aircraft parts, food, high-tech equipment, the majority of which could not be found elsewhere. Well, Putin and the Chinese leader would like to make people think that they're on the way to supplanting U.S. leadership in the world, but that's just not true. And with that, I want to bring in this country's leading expert on China, Gordon Chang. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you so much, Alan.
What do you think the Chinese leader believes he accomplished, flexing his political and military muscle with a stage full of people that he calls friends?
First thing, they wanted to show to the Chinese people that the Communist Party is strong and responsible for, as Xi Jinping says, the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. And he also has the tagline, China is unstoppable. But the second message is for the rest of the world, that China is the dominant power and that the United States is finished. The one thing we should remember is that the ancient Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu said, when weak, appear strong. And I think that's really what was in the back of Xi Jinping's mind as he staged the largest military parade in Communist Party history. And so really what we're talking about is a regime that is deeply worried about events at home and wants to project to the world that it is the new superpower.
Well, Pete Hegseth says that it was the weak Biden years that helped drive China and Russia together. Is that how Xi sees it? And is that why he's trying to hold his ground against Trump, who's nothing like his predecessor?
Yeah, I think the Secretary of Defense was right that China and Russia did get closer together during the Biden years, and Biden had something to do with it. But even preceding Biden's term in office, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin were very close. It's just that we Americans refuse to acknowledge it. But Putin and Xi Jinping see the world in the same terms. They identify their interests more or less the same, and they see the same enemy, which is the United States. So this is a long-term problem for us. And we Americans have got to realize that we've got enemies and that those enemies can hurt us. And we need to talk about this in public in candid tones, because clearly the Chinese and the Russians and the North Koreans and the Iranians are not mincing their words when they're in private.
Well, Xi certainly has a lot of weapons and soldiers to show off, by volume at least. But given how dependent he is on the United States, what's his end game by having such a massive display for the world to see?
I think that his end game, as he sees it, is intimidating Trump into submission. And actually, the Chinese today think that they have accomplished that. I'm not saying they're right. I don't think they are. I don't think President Trump is submissive, but the Chinese think that. And until President Trump disabuses Xi Jinping of that, we're in trouble, because China's information warfare campaign is effective. Yes, its narratives are absurd, but it is nonetheless effective. And President Trump has the power to reach out and undermine those narratives in one stroke. But the president, our president, hasn't done that yet. And until he does, this Chinese narrative is going to be strong. Matter of fact, it was not only these hardline states that were there, but they were countries that were friendly to the United States, or countries that we actually have an obligation to defend, like Turkey. President Erdogan was there. And that's a problem for us, because it shows you how effective Chinese propaganda can be.
Well, if the president has the ability with a single stroke to change the narrative, what stroke would you suggest that he take?
I think that he actually imposes, let's say, 25% tariffs or higher tariffs on China for purchasing Russian crude. India right now is really pissed at us for a number of reasons, but one of them is because on August 6th, the Trump administration administration announced the imposition of 25% tariffs on India for purchasing Russian crude. Now, the Indians make the claim, oh, that's unjustified. No, it's not. What President Trump did was justified. But the Indians have a point when they say it was unfair, because the Chinese, we didn't impose those same tariffs on the Chinese. The Chinese say, look, you didn't impose those tariffs on us, you're afraid of us. Trump needs to impose those tariffs, more than 25% on the Chinese, put Xi Jinping in his place, tell the Chinese who's boss.
You know, as an observer, President Trump doesn't seem to deal well with threats. So I'm wondering if the big Xi photo op is going to drive our president towards this tougher deal with China. You know, he's made clear what he thinks about this relationship. Listen to this short comment he made.
China needs us, and I have a very good relationship with President Xi, as you know, but China needs us much more than we need them.
Gordon, do you agree that China needs us much more than we need them? And if so, what should the president do to stay ahead of this rather tense back and forth?
President is right. China is now more export dependent than it has been throughout the communist period. Xi Jinping can't do without America's consumer market, which is about 34% of global consumer spending. I think President Trump needs to load up the Chinese on tariffs, really high tariffs for fentanyl, for money laundering, for all sorts of things. These are things the president can do to show China that he's not afraid of the Chinese. The other thing he can do, by the way, is unplug Chinese banks from the dollar system, because those Chinese banks have been doing a lot of money laundering recently. And this is a bad story, especially because some of that money laundering relates to fentanyl. 48,000 American fentanyl deaths last year, Alan.
Well, the public display was impressive. Xi tried to make it sound like the rest of the folks in the photo op are his friends: Iran, Cuba, Cambodia, Vietnam, India, Russia, and a lot more. Your most recent book is called Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Are they actually friends, or is this just part of Xi's plan to destroy America?
Yeah, it is part of China's plan to destroy America. China doesn't really have friends, but it does have countries that are willing to do China's bidding for various reasons. So, for instance, Russia would not be fighting in Ukraine right now were it not for China's support. Iran would not be able to continue its assault on Israel were it not for China's support. Cuba certainly depends on it. These countries do depend on China. Now, they don't like the Chinese in many cases. They're afraid of the Chinese in many cases. But Xi Jinping is able to wield coercive power in order to get them to do what he wants. And that's what's important.
We need to take a short break. Gordon, can you stay with us for another segment?
I would be honored to.
Awesome.
So thank you, Pastor.
Well, for those of you watching, this would be a good time to log on to ajnow.com and see how you can contribute ideas to this show. We welcome all of them. We'll be right back. I'd like to extend a personal invitation to join us for our Culture and Christianity Conference. It's September the 19th and 20th on our campus here at World Outreach Church, just outside of Nashville. We've chosen 3 specific topics to explore with a wonderful group of guests. We're going to talk about the church and our expected impact in this culture, the media and their impact in our culture, and then finally, our health, how we can be healthy in the midst of all these competing voices we're hearing. The real goal is how we take our faith and integrate it in our world so we have better lives, stronger families, and strengthen our nation. Join us for Culture and Christianity here in Murfreesboro. We're back now with China expert Gordon Chang, the successful author of many books, including his most recent. It's called Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Gordon, what is it exactly about the United States that Xi fears?
You know, that's a great question, because China believes it is in an existential struggle with us. And it believes that not because of anything that we Americans say or do, but it's because of who we are. You have an insecure regime in Beijing, headed by Xi Jinping, which is worried about the inspirational impact of America's values and form of governance on the Chinese people. So the party believes it'll never be safe as long as the United States exists. And that means we will never have amicable relations with China as long as the Communist Party rules it.
So they're threatened by the existence of our freedom and liberty.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why they have determined to destroy us, because they realize that then from their perspective, they realize that they have to get rid of free societies. And the most important of the free societies is the United States. It's the United States that blocks their expansive territorial ambitions, for instance, in the South China Sea, against Japan, against the Philippines, against Taiwan, you name it. The United States is there to protect peace and stability. And that's another reason why they believe that they've got to get rid of us.
Well, I was struck by something I saw about how China prepared for the big summit. Not everyone knows how bad the pollution is in China, but Beijing especially. So authorities there ordered that no one could cook at home so that smoke wouldn't interfere with the parade visuals. So instead of bacon and scrambled eggs, the government handed out breakfast packs with hard-boiled eggs, rolls, and Chinese pickles. My question is, if the leadership is so concerned about the sight of pollution, why don't they actually do something about it, given that they rank among the worst in global air quality?
Yeah, I mean, they're obsessive. So for instance, when President Trump had his military parade, you had the streets lined with people waving. And matter of fact, our soldiers waved back. It was a friendly atmosphere, an atmosphere of celebration. What we saw on September 3 in Beijing, there were no observers other than those on the reviewing stand. They were kept back about a block and a half. Windows were closed. Businesses were told to shut and send their employees home. This is a deeply insecure regime. And so you can see why they, for instance, didn't want people to cook. They just did not want anything to interfere.
Well, Xi is struggling with a weaker economy, but at the same time, he invited some of his closest competitors to the summit. Vietnam and Indonesia are among those who are producing better and cheaper products, undermining some of the markets that China has held unilaterally for years. Do you have any idea how Xi's dealing with the competition from these other countries?
Well, China is losing lower-end manufacturing for a number of reasons, which gets a little bit complex. And Vietnam, for instance, has been the big beneficiary of that. Vietnam was invited, I think, because, first of all, it's a neighbor. Second of all, the Chinese view the Vietnamese as inferior, so they had to be summoned to the Grand Celestial Court for the Emperor's Parade. So there was a certain amount of imperial era mentality in that. And that's why you had countries in Southeast Asia, which have been used to accepting an inferior position, going to Beijing for that parade. And that is an indication of the power that China wields in its own region. Now, these are countries that are deeply fearful of China. Vietnam and Malaysia depend on the U.S. for their security, but nonetheless, they feel that when China calls, they got to answer.
Well, as I mentioned at the top of the show, the tariffs are far from settled. I have a sense that President Trump is going to come down hard on China and continue to try to pump up American products. If Trump asked for your advice on what to do, what would you tell him?
I would tell him to, even before the end of the current 90-day pause, which expires on November 9th, to say to China, look, I'm tired of you just not dealing with us in good faith, and impose really sky-high tariffs, and tell the Chinese that if they cut off magnets and rare earths, that we're going to cut off Boeing parts and services. We're going to make life really difficult for them. I think that President Trump can intimidate the Chinese into submission, because the Chinese are ruthlessly pragmatic. And they may tell us that that their country is unstoppable, but it's very stoppable. And President Trump can do that. This is not going to be easy. It's not going to be something which is going to go without friction. But at some point, we have got to show the Chinese that we're not afraid of them, because once we do that, the rest of the world will sit up and take notice, and they will see how weak China really is. That changes the global dynamic overnight.
Well, before we run out of time, what should we be looking for as the next few months progress?
I think the turmoil at the top of the Communist Party is the most important developments in the world today. There are a lot of rumors flying around the Chinese military about who controls it. And there are a lot of rumors about what's happening among civilians in the Communist Party. We're going to find out a lot after the end of the Communist Party's Central Committee's fourth plenum, which is next month. And either all these rumors are going to go away because Xi Jinping will still be in charge, or we may see a new set of leaders in Beijing. That, to me, is the most important thing in the next month.
Well, Gordon Chang, your insights are extremely helpful to those of us without your expertise. And I know from our feedback that the viewers faithfully watch when you're on. So thank you again for your time today. You always bring clarity.
Well, thank you, Pastor Jackson. I very much appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
In a moment, the hope that exists even around this complicated relationship with China. We'll be right back. Hey, I want to give you a personal invitation to join my podcast, Culture and Christianity.
For a person to think that the Bible is not political, you don't know the Bible.
We're trying to understand how to take our faith outside the walls of the church and live it out in the marketplace.
He will show you what to do, whether it's in our communities, in our country, or other places in the world.
So I brought in some friends, some people that are trying to do this.
How could anyone call themselves Christian and be pro-choice? Is beyond my comprehension.
But I think he wanted them open and in need of him every day.
We have been living through a season of unprecedented deception, propaganda, manipulation.
Everybody says, oh, Israel is attacking schools in the Gaza Strip.
I want to be a part of seeing culture and Christianity intersect. Hope you enjoy the podcast. You know, our experiences together since the start of this decade have been very insightful and very different than any previous experiences we've had. We faced a pandemic. China, the country where it originated, hid the facts from the world, denied it, did their best to cover it up. Billions of lives affected around the earth due to the virus and the mandated measures that were taken to try to stop the spread. And China never suffered any true consequences for the devastation they unleashed. The Ukraine war was started by Putin. It's caused millions of people to endure tremendous suffering and death. Ballistic missiles the size of telephone poles have struck apartment buildings in Ukraine where only women and children live. Entire cities have been leveled to rubble. Open Doors, an organization that raises awareness of Christian persecution around the world, well, they've ranked North Korea as the #1 most dangerous country for Christians. The regime considers Christianity an existential threat. If a North Korean's Christian faith is discovered, it can lead to immediate execution or a sentence to a labor camp, which very few survive. So when we see the recent gathering of the leaders of these nations at the largest military parade the world has ever seen in China, it's more than a photo op, it's a projection of authoritarian ideology that practices social control and manipulation. Communism is not just another economic system. It's one of the most destructive, murderous expressions of human authority in all of history. And the people who advocate for socialism and communism today in our nation, in our biggest cities, they have to deny history to do so. And it's only our profound ignorance that gives them a place in the public square. Now, when we see as Christ followers troubling events, we don't need to be afraid. And we really can't afford the luxury of just an escapist mentality. We must persevere because as Christ followers, we still have an assignment to be salt and light. There are good things ahead. Jesus is still on the throne and there are opportunities. So let's be fully engaged in doing His work everywhere we go, no matter what we see. If we'll do that, there's more reasons for hope than despair, I promise. We'll be right back with your emails. Thank you for spending a few minutes of your day with us. It's always an honor to have this time together. If you ever miss an episode live, you can always go to ajnow.com. There's a full archive there. You can watch the shows at your leisure. It makes them easy to share with a friend. And I thank you especially for emails. They're always a highlight. A recent YouTube viewer commented on the Taya Kyle episode Thank you, Pastor Allen and Taya, for this heartfelt interview. Taya, thank you for sharing your profound and inspiring story of courage and hope. I've learned to be grateful to our Lord in everything, good and bad. We're thankful for Chris's service, and many thanks to you, Taya, for all you do. May God continue to bless you and your family. Well, I thought Taya's story was very encouraging. It reminds us that there are heroes. You know, there's a lot of clutter and chatter to the contrary. We've got to climb over that. I believe that our first responders, our police officers, our military, they truly are heroes, and they deserve our respect and our encouragement and our affirmation. I've got an idea for all those that are shouting we should defund the police. What if we defund the politicians? Let's defund all those people that hate our heroes and send them home, and put our first responders and police and military back on the front lines with our full support. That'll make our lives better. Judy B. from Palmdale wrote in one of your daily devotionals, you said, reading the Bible is not a religious chore. It's a privilege with a purpose. I love that statement. It would look great on a mug, a t-shirt, or a magnet. Thank you again, Pastor. You're truly a gift from God. Well, how about all the above? Mugs, t-shirts, and magnets. Here we go. Wayne W. remarked, the segment about big city crime was spot on. What I'm seeing is the people running them are corrupt, and if the president sends in the military, they'll get exposed for their criminal activities. You know, the president can send in reinforcements for our police and first responders, but at the end of the day, it's the character of the American people that is being called into question. Will we stand up for the law to be honored and to be enforced once again, or will we continue to capitulate to lawlessness? We have almost lost the idea that law should be enforced, that we should live under those boundaries. And until we have the courage to come back to that, the things that the president and his team of very willing people can do are just Band-Aids. We need a heart change, and if we'll do that, I believe we'll have a culture change. But without any question, God is moving in the earth. The truth is being spoken from the public square, from the White House to your house. Let's keep choosing the truth. I'm Alan Jackson, and I pray you have a wonderful evening.